Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I wish to express the condolences of our party on all of those South African soldiers, those brave men and women who have lost their life in Goma during the course of this week. Our thoughts and prayers are with their families, and we remain in deep awe of their service to our country. Please forgive me as well. I've also picked up the Gauteng virus, and if you're asking me why it's a Gauteng virus, it's a virus and it comes from Gauteng, and it's obviously affected my voice. As stated this past weekend and many times prior, the Democratic Alliance entered into the government of national unity with two key considerations in mind. Firstly, the ANC had insufficient votes to govern outright on their own, and therefore a coalition government was required. South Africa would not survive a doomsday coalition, which included either the EFF or the MK party, or both. A coalition which included a party with a proven track record in good governance, fiscal discipline, and respect for the rule of law was required, and that party is the Democratic Alliance. Secondly, this provided an opportunity to have direct influence on the programs of government and the implementation of a new agenda focused on inclusive growth, economic prosperity, and jobs, and one that was agreed to by a diverse set of ideological policies and principles. For this to be possible, the two largest parties within the GNU needed to ensure that at all times there was consensus on government's program of action. Of late, this consensus has clearly been brought into question. The DA is obviously extremely committed to ensuring that this coalition government succeeds in its two primary objectives: increased and inclusive economic growth and jobs. It was for this reason that I wrote to the President declaring a dispute and invoking Clause 19 of the Statement of Intent. Clause 19 codifies the procedure to be followed when differences on issues arise between parties to the GNU. Let me also be very clear, because I've noted certain tweets by certain office bearers in the ANC that seem to imply that 19 doesn't apply to decisions on legislation and other things. It absolutely does. It applies to any matter where there's no agreement between the parties within the GNU. Clause 19.3 states specifically that, and I quote, "Sufficient consensus exists when parties to the GNU representing 60% of seats in the National Assembly agree," unquote. The only parties that represent 60% of the vote in the National Assembly and are part of the GNU are the ANC and the DA. In my letter, and in the spirit of attempting to improve the relationship between the DA and the ANC, I insisted on a meeting with the President, and that this meeting must take place prior to the upcoming Cabinet Lekgotla, which is taking place over the next 2 days. This is where important government decisions are going to be made, and where the program of action for the government of national unity will be set out. I'm glad that the President has heeded the call and discussions underway to arrange this meeting between myself and the President. I hope that this will be the first step in improving the relationships and stability and restoring trust amongst coalition partners within the GNU. We remain committed to the government of national unity. We see it as a clear vehicle for economic growth and job creation. A very real risk to the country, however, still remains, and that risk is the implementation of the NHI. We have submitted over the course of the last few months detailed programs, alternatives, as well as costed different ways of being able to implement universal access to basic healthcare for all South Africans, regardless of their income status or geographic area. It is important to emphasize that the Democratic Alliance stands square behind universal access to basic healthcare for all South Africans. We do not, however, believe that the currently conceived NHI, as presented, will achieve universal healthcare and without doing significant damage to the private healthcare sector in South Africa, and also potentially causing the collapse or further collapse of the public healthcare sector. As stated when we entered the GNU, we said that the DA would not be part of any government which crashes the economy or trashes the Constitution. Implementation of the NHI in its current form, we believe, will destroy the private healthcare sector. The constitutional right to have access to healthcare services will also be severely compromised, if not totally destroyed. the subsequent economic decline and job losses will simply be unbearable. Tomorrow, Cabinet will meet to finalise the medium-term development plan, which will inform the budget, and the budget informs government's programme of action. Our submission to the President was clear around what we believe are concrete alternatives where we can find common ground on achieving universal access to basic health care for all South Africans, regardless of their income or geography. And we will certainly be moving within the MDTP process to ensure that those submissions are aired and listened to. However, if there's an insistence that without any further consultation, NHI in its current form, including the targets it set out to collapse private medical health care and remove tax credits for medical aid, will not be tolerated. I reiterate my earlier statement. The Democratic Alliance stands square behind the Government of National Unity. We see it as an opportunity for South Africa to move forward in a unified way and in a way that grows the economy and creates jobs. Having returned from Davos, having engaged with a number of other countries, both bilaterally and multilaterally, there's a renewed excitement in South Africa. Investors are looking at South Africa as a viable investment destination again. The GNU has already started to show the green shoots of economic growth and lowering unemployment figures. I sincerely hope that as the President and I and others, because we're not the only party who's feeling excluded from the ANC's decision-making and feeling marginalised and have been reduced to being spectators. At least 3 of the other parties in the GNU have released statements over the last 72 hours indicating their unhappiness with the lack of consultation within the Government of National Unity. So we really hope that the President is going to treat this impasse with the urgency that it deserves, and that concrete measures are going to be found to ensure that we are able to make this GNU work. The Democratic Alliance's Federal Council met yesterday, and there were extensive discussions over a variety of matters, including the GNU. Democratic Alliance remains, as a political party, fully committed to the GNU. However, we need to make sure that the Democratic Alliance, as the second largest party in the GNU, is allowed to be able to express itself, is allowed to put on the table alternatives, and to work together to find consensus decision-making within the GNU. If that is not possible, it makes future involvement in the GNU incredibly difficult to justify to our voters, the 3.5 million people who entrusted us with their vote in this last election. Entering into the GNU was a decision not made lightly. It was made after extensive discussion, looking at varieties of scenarios. Exiting the GNU will also not be made a decision that will be made lightly or in a cavalier way, because we can see already some of the symptoms of what happens with even a bit of instability in the GNU, and that's reflected in what happened in the Rand over the course of the last 24 hours. We want to see South Africa succeed. We are committed to a country that is more inclusive, that has greater opportunities for job creation for more South Africans, in which every South African can live a life of opportunity and dignity, and finds in South Africa a government that's on their side to help them realize that opportunity and to be the best that they can be for themselves and their families. We will continue to work as hard as we can and as constructively as we can with all parties to the GNU, including the ANC, and we hope to find consensus on the way forward. But I must make it very clear, and no one must be under any doubt, that we will not be taken for granted, we will not be reduced to being spectators, and the day that we cannot have an influence on growing the economy and creating jobs will be the day that our future involvement in the GNU will have to be questioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and good morning, everybody. This weekend, in fact, yesterday, the Democratic Alliance Federal Council, which is the highest body outside a federal Congress, met here in Johannesburg. All people from across South Africa, all 9 provinces, provincial leaders, various structures of the various legislatures, various municipalities, various regions in South Africa, had a full day discussing very important matters yesterday. That meeting was chaired by the chairperson of the Federal Council, Ms. Helen Ziller. Very important Federal Council, the first Federal Council for the year 2025. And the main purpose of this Federal Council was to prepare for the local government election 2026. because we have seen that it is possible for the Democratic Alliance to become the single biggest party in South Africa in the 2026 elections. Because what we have seen here in South Africa now, all municipalities in South Africa, major municipalities, major metros also right here in Gauteng, they face a governance crisis and they face a service delivery crisis. And so the DA, Democratic Alliance Federal Council, have met to discuss our plan and the way forward for the local government election 2026. We have 4 specific objectives. Number 1, to retain our DA municipalities. You all know that the best run metropolitan municipality in South Africa is the one of the city of Cape Town. You have seen all the audit outcomes and the service delivery records as produced by both the Auditor General and by Stats SA confirms that where the DA is in municipal government, you get the best service delivery and the best record of good governance. And so our objectives is to attain our municipalities. The second objective is to grow the Democratic Alliance footprint. Thirdly, is to govern in more towns. Fourthly, is also to rescue towns. We want to become the biggest party because what we have seen is that smaller parties, it doesn't help voters to vote for smaller parties. Gauteng is in a mess because the voters have voted for smaller parties that make absolutely no impact. On the contrary, what they do, they rather side with the ANC, vote for the ANC mayor, and get an ANC mayor, and the towns collapse further right in front of our eyes. So smaller parties at local government level increases the level of political instability. So we are asking voters across South Africa, from this experience that we have seen since the previous election and the collapse of municipalities caused mainly by the ANC and these smaller parties. If you rally behind the Democratic Alliance, you get a stable, functional local government and you get service delivery. And so there's a dire reality in South Africa. Many municipalities across South Africa have already collapsed. It's already a failed state. Almost every single municipality in the Free State, every single municipality in Northwest have already collapsed. Now we are now talking about the bread and butter politics of citizens. It affects citizens. There's a dire reality playing in front of us. What is that the reality at local government level? Well, we have seen that many towns, clean water, even here where we are right now in Gauteng, people failing to supply water, it has collapsed. Severe water insecurity, and even here in Gauteng we now have a water tanker mafia filling the gaps, criminals taking over. Electricity supply falling apart, frequent breakdowns, and yet Eskom and NERSA is proposing a 40% increase in the tariffs. We have seen over the last 15 years South Africans becoming poorer in terms of the GDP per capita, and a 40% increase will just simply put many people out of jobs. The roads infrastructure very critical. It has crumbled, potholes, no marking, no stormwater repairs and upgrades. We are now here in Gauteng, the financial capital of the continent, but the roads are crumbling right in front of us. Street lights, mass lights, not working. It's a haven for crime. I traveled yesterday from here, Johannesburg, to Pretoria. Many of the traffic lights were not working. Refuse collection, weeks on end, the rubbish piled up outside homes and businesses. Traffic lights are broken, signage are unreadable, public safety, zero public safety capacity. The first function of a government, even before collecting tax, is to ensure the safety of the citizens. Not happening. Grass cutting, no mowers, no tractors, parks and public spaces, no care, no upgrades, illegal dumping. In fact, during the election, I was in Morofeng. There, in the ward where the mayor was a dumping site this high, and he lives in that ward, not caring, not interested. But there's hope. We can fix this mess. But this requires a new government, a government led by the party, the Democratic Alliance, because we know how to deliver and we have a track record. Now, this is not me speaking to you. This is the Auditor General of South Africa, and this is Stats SA. They measure, for example, 4 specific things. Access to water, where the DA governs the best. Access to electricity, where the DA governs the best. Refuse collection, where the DA governs the best. Access to sanitation, where the DA governs the best. Not me, Stats SA. And so this weekend, we came together as the Democratic Alliance Federal Council to put the DA machine in operation countrywide. And we are now preparing for the election, local government election 2026. We have deployed all our ground forces to work every day from now onwards. But we have developed a new approach to reaching voters where they live on matters that matters to them the most. It is now the realpolitik. They say all politics are local, and therefore our electoral campaigns will focus on local-based issues, but our campaign will be in hyperdrive. We are now going out everywhere in South Africa, beginning with our annual general meetings in every ward, our DA branches, every constituency in every region and every province, to reaffirm our commitment to the DA and to elect our new branch membership. The blue machine, we know, is at its strongest, and it is now focused on preparing for the next election. We have a rescue mission for your town. In this coming election, we know that this will be the make or break election for hundreds of towns in South Africa. Many people across towns have decided to fix things themselves. But this is unfair because they pay tax for a municipality. That money is being stolen and no services happens. And so this election, we are asking people no longer to waste their money, their time and their vote on smaller parties, because we see what happened in councils. They side with the ANC and the collapse continue. The DA is preparing to challenge for governance seriously in these places. The DA is now preparing to rescue your town. We can only do this with a strong DA vote. We cannot rescue these towns if you split your vote. Voting against the current failing government in your town needs to result in a strong challenger that brings a new government, a capable state at work. And only the DA can do this, because there are powers and functions described in the Constitution in Chapter 7, the objectives of local government. And all of these are being violated where the ANC is in government. And so my colleague, the chairperson of the Federal Council, will now outline the specifics, detail of our preparation for the local government election, specifically since we have dealt with our candidate nominations regulations, and Mozilla will now outline all of these detail as well as the time frames that is very critical for the elections. Our purpose is to rescue your town.
Thank you very much, Ivan, who is the chairperson of the Democratic Alliance, the federal chairperson of the Democratic Alliance. My role as chair of the Federal Council is to talk about the DA's preparations for the election as an organization. And we call the DA organization the Blue Machine for a very good reason. The Blue Machine lives from election to election. So immediately after the May election last year, John gave us 2 days off, and after that we started preparing for the local government election, which will either take place towards the end of 2026 or the beginning of 2027. Now, 2 years is a very short time in politics, and that is why you have to start working immediately. And the very first thing we did was to have a big meeting representing all our provinces to look at what went right in the election and what went wrong in the election. And we always, immediately after an election, learn the lessons and then try and incorporate those lessons into our plans going forward. Now, one of the things we do is revise our candidate nomination regulations before every election so that we could look at any place that there was a hiccup or a misalignment or a problem and see if we can improve our system to deal with it. So shortly after the national election last year, we asked all provinces to submit any amendments they wanted to have to the candidate nomination regulations. Now, the DA has very detailed candidate nomination regulations that prescribes fair processes for everybody to ensure that we get the very best talent South Africa can offer. And let me underline that. It's not the very best talent the DA can offer. It's the very best talent South Africa can offer to come into the ranks of the DA and contest for a place, an electable place, on our lists. So we don't fish in the same small DA pond over and over again. The entire purpose is to say, let's look to see who out there is passionate about their community, who is at one or aligned to the DA's value set and is prepared to work day and night to rescue South Africa. And the public representatives in the DA do that and do conform with that notion, and they get performance managed to ensure that they do and that they retain that idea. But there are many people outside the DA that we're wanting to bring in too. And our candidate search and our candidate nomination regulations are designed to do that. On the 2nd of December, we had our first virtual meeting to discuss the updating of our candidate nomination regulations, clause by clause. And this year we had an in-person meeting yesterday on the 27th of January to finalize our candidate nomination regulations. A Herculean task, but they are now adopted by the Federal Council. They will be implemented by the Blue Machine and the relevant people who manage these processes within the Democratic Alliance. They will be free, fair, and open to all applicants who will get a fair and equal chance in front of our electoral colleges, in front of our selection panels, and in all the evaluations that we do on our perform system for incumbents. Now, Ivan told you what a dire state our municipalities are in, certainly outside of the Western Cape. And you will never get growth and jobs if you have failing government. Growth and jobs only comes from investment. Investment only happens where people have confidence in the future. No one is going to invest in a place where there isn't reliable electricity, where there isn't clean and reliable water, where you can't flush a toilet, and you can't transport your goods because the transport infrastructure has collapsed. No one. And that is why it is no coincidence that more and more investment is leaving Gauteng and coming to the Western Cape. Now, the DA is not a Western Cape party. We are as passionate about the future of Gauteng as we are about every other part of our country. And we want Gauteng to work and continue to be the financial capital of the African continent. We need it to be. And we need it to be so that this economic machine can drive the investment that will create the growth and jobs that we desperately need to succeed as a country. And that will only happen with good governance. Now, good governance depends on the voters. And people often say to me, Zilla, don't blame the voters. I'm not blaming the voters. I'm stating the basic fact about democracy 101. Voters get the government they vote for. And we've tried coalitions, very unstable, very complex, 11-party coalitions, 9-party coalitions in Gauteng. And because of the brokenness, and because of the fact that deployed cadres control the administration, and because of the fact that there's so many vested interests, it makes it incredibly difficult for a coalition to govern. And the stronger the DA is in any kind of coalition, obviously, the better. And if the DA does emerge as the biggest party in all the metros, then we're in a position to put up an executive mayoral candidate and to make sure that we can follow the DA's tried and tested recipe of turning things around and making things successful. We have that experience, but in Cape Town I was very lucky when I became mayor in a 7-party coalition. The ANC hadn't been in power for that long. And so there wasn't that much brokenness that had to be fixed. That's not the same in Gauteng. You've had ANC government for almost 30 years, and there is a lot to fix. And with the exit of a lot of capital and skills from Gauteng, it shrinks the rate base and it makes it more and more difficult to do so. So we're not exaggerating when we say to people that time is genuinely running out, and there comes a point of no return. So that was the purpose of our candidate selection process review. How are we going to find the very best people who are up to this crucial challenge, and how are we going to prepare them for the rigors and the incredible burdens that they're going to face going forward? So this year, we have decided to run what we call a Catalyst program. We advertised very widely for it in September last year. We got a lot of applicants, and we chose the very best people with skills, a track record. These aren't entry-level people. These are people who have had some serious experience before and who now believe that it's make or break for South African local government, and who want to come and throw their skills into the DA to help us rescue our towns and cities. And out of the many applicants we got, we chose 77 candidates who are going to be on our year-long Catalyst program to prepare people for the rigors of the candidate selection process, in which they will have to compete. There's no guarantee to anyone that they will be on an electable position on a list. But to be sure that we are finding ways of being a magnet to skilled people, mid-level professionals, high-level professionals who want to come into politics because they understand that unless we fix the towns and cities politically through good governance, the rest is unattainable. And rescuing South Africa is also unattainable. So, we're always fresh out of the blocks, and we've prepared everything, and our applications for candidacy for the 2026-27 local government election, our applications open on the 1st of February. So that's when people can start submitting their CVs. We've got a very clear online process for applications, and we are going to call far and wide for people to apply. Then, on the 1st of March, we will be opening applications for mayoral candidates in our metros. Obviously, our metros are going to be ground zero in the selection, especially the Gauteng metros. We're on the search for the brightest and the best and the most capable from inside the DA's ranks and from outside the DA's ranks. Because we don't close the door to talented people from outside, we look actively for talented people from outside. And I recall many years ago in the early 2000s, when we first advertised for candidates, the media all laughed at us. None of you, because I don't think many of you were around then. But the media all laughed at us because they said, don't you have, Mr. Mbedjes is an exception, but nevertheless, most of you weren't here then, and the media all laughed at us, and they said, don't you have enough people inside the DA? Why are you advertising? And we said, of course we have enough people inside, but there are a lot of people outside that we would also like to have, because they're good, and they're coming in and competing with our candidates, and they prevent us from becoming complacent, and we have to be on point in everything that we do. And so that is our philosophy, and that is how we function. And so we're on a big search for metro mayoral candidates inside and outside the party. So we've got a timetable for the entire election campaign. And the Blue Machine does things on time and within budget. And we've got a very good staff component who are a greased and oiled machine in delivering elections. We're on it, as they say, the young kids say, ons is op het. And we are going to put every ounce of our energy and commitment to continue our rescue mission in South Africa by becoming the biggest party in the major metropolitan municipalities of South Africa. And once we've done that, it will be a critical watershed to saving the Gauteng economy, to putting Gauteng on a path of hope and economic growth and creating jobs and helping our country become the success we know it can be. Thank you very much indeed, and I'm now going to ask my colleague Vili, one of the two co-conspirators with Karabo, to come and chair the question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Helen. Good morning, colleagues from the media, and thank you to everybody for being here. We've got a full house again. We had a full house on Saturday, so thank you very much. You are always welcome, and it's a privilege for us to share with you our vision with regards to all the various aspects. We are now going to do the question session. I would ask that you, before you ask your question, just wait for the roaming mic so that the people that's online can also hear the question that you're asking. Please state your name as well as the name of the news outlet that you are representing and the person that you direct your question to. I will decide ultimately then who must answer that specific question, but if you can do that in that order. I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. If the questions, because sometimes you ask a person asks a question, but there's 4 or 5 questions in it, I might limit it to 2, so let's see how things goes. Can I get some hands, please? 1, 2, 3. I'm going to start here in the front. Please, good morning. Just wait for the mic a moment.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Mzwandile Lembeje from the SAPC. I think 2 questions. One is to Mr. Steenhuisen on his take, obviously, on the GNU. I think his closing remark was that if we feel, okay, I'm just going to paraphrase it, if we feel we're being ignored in the GNU, perhaps it may be time to walk out. You didn't say it that way. Is that what you meant? So if you feel that the ANC is not responsive to some of the concerns that you've raised, so is the last resort to walk out of the GNU? The other question, I think it can maybe it's going to go to the chairpersons. It's about the municipalities and the local government related stuff. Obviously, you've always held the Western Cape as the shining example. But the DA from 2016 has been basically, in the majority of years from then and now, been the one that has been in the driving seat of the municipalities, particularly Johannesburg and Tshwane. Obviously, there will be changes along the way. But if you look at the years, it's actually the majority of the years from 2016 until now, that would be the DA. But the kind of the decay that you've been highlighting, so it really didn't start now. And how do you then apportion that blame to only the ANC aligned and not take some sort of responsibility, because some of it really has been under your watch? Thanks.
Thank you very much.
It's Yanda Ngobo from Newsroom Africa. Just following on Mzwandile's questions, in relation to the Expropriation Act, are you still planning to test its constitutionality in court, or are you still going to wait for the engagement with the President, Mr. Steenhuisen, first, before following through with any legal challenge? Excuse me. And then the second question is linked to the first. Fikile Mbalula talking about Clause 19 not applying to bills that have already been passed. I know you addressed it briefly in your address, but was Dean McPherson given enough time to respond? Vincent Magwenya seems to believe that he was given enough time to respond and share any concerns that he has. Was that done, and what was the response? Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Thembi Letsele with Bloomberg News. I think my questions are for the leader of the DA. The first one is, during the coalition talks, there was talk of red lines that the DA had. Does the DA still have red lines, and what are they as of today? And then the second question, you mentioned the market fluctuations, sort of the instability that we're seeing every time there are these skirmishes within the GNU. How will we know that the day has arrived when the DA cannot have an influence on the economy, as you mentioned? I'm trying to get a sense of, obviously, I imagine you don't like it when there is this negative movement in the economy. So how will the markets know that this is now a serious dispute, that there really is a threat to the GNU with finality? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just repeat quickly. We've got Mzwanele Mbete, the first question, then to John with regards to the GNU. And then I would like to direct the next question to Helen with regards to the Western Cape as an example and what happened in Johannesburg and Tshwane since 2016. Zianda, your question about the Expropriation Act, whether we'll go to court or not, will be directed to John. And then the matter of Fikile Mbalula and Article 19 as well. Demile, your question about the red lines as well as the market fluctuations will both be directed to John. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thanks very much for the questions. There's no point in being in government if you can't govern. There's no point in bringing 3.5 million votes to a table and you can't influence the policy and direction of that government or the programs of that government. And that is what I was trying to say very, very clearly, that we regard the GNU as South Africa's most precious asset at the moment in terms of what it holds in its hands, the future of the country, the future of the economy, the future of our people. And that is why all parties to the GNU need to be good stewards and good responsible stewards of the GNU. But being a responsible steward means that you have to be a reliable coalition partner and a trustworthy coalition partner as well. So when you make decisions and you don't consult the rest of your party, the parties in the coalition, without even giving a courtesy call to the leaders, knowing how contentious the expropriation bill has been, knowing the fact that you received a 2-page submission from the Minister of Public Works with a legal opinion from senior counsel attached, pointing out the constitutional problems with the bill, and you simply go ahead and do it, and the leaders of your coalition find out about it on social media, that is not being a good steward or a good partner of the GNU. And that is our gripe. Now, I believe that we could quite easily have found a way through this particular impasse had there been a discussion amongst leaders. There's a number of options. There was nothing instructing the president to sign this bill. There's no urgency on it. We could have had a discussion about it. We could have decided to refer it back to Parliament. We could have amended it there using the GNU's majority in Parliament to come up with a bill that met all of these requirements. Or the president could have simply called us in and given us his reasons why he was going to proceed. Instead, all brushed aside, I found out on social media on my way back from Davos that this bill had been signed. And my party is rightly asking questions of me, saying, but was this discussed in the GNU? And I want to dispel this particular notion that seems to exist among some, that this administration is an extension of the Sixth administration. It's not. This is a new government. It's not the same government that's picked up the reins from the last election and carrying on. The voters of South Africa in the last election took the ANC's majority away from them. The Seventh administration is a coalition government. And so you can't just simply carry on governing as if the election last year didn't happen. It happened. And voters took that majority away for a reason. And they instructed us as parties to work together to find solutions for the country. And so this notion that, well, something was done in the Sixth administration suddenly makes it all right for the Seventh administration. It's not how coalitions work. There's no government in the world that works like that. Zianda, there were large, as I say, submissions made by the Minister of Public Works on this bill, along with a very clear legal opinion from one of South Africa's best senior counsels, indicating the problems with the bill. Now, some people are a bit confused about this because they think this bill has amended the Constitution, or amended Section 25. It hasn't done that. But what it has done is set up the procedure for expropriation to take place in South Africa. But the problem is that the bill contains two wholly contradictory procedures within the bill, which is going to make it impossible for any court to adjudicate should the bill be tested. And it's that concern that was raised in the opinion, and it's that concern that has exercised the minister. And had we just sat around a table and had a discussion about this, we could have ironed these things out. And so we've got to move forward. We've got to move forward in trying to find ways to deal with these things going forward. But it cannot be simply a case of it's our way or the highway. And it's a lesson the DA had to learn as well when we started out in coalitions. You've got to understand that everyone in a coalition is a minority party. There's no majority party in a coalition. And you can't just carry on doing what you want to do. I mean, I remember the times we were accused of being bullies and every name under the sun. You learn within the coalition environment that you need all the parties in that coalition to help you get through what you need to get through. And you can't just simply treat coalition partners, especially the largest of those in your coalition, as some sort of numbers, number providers for your will. We take the responsibility of being in government incredibly seriously, and I think that's reflected in the work to date by DA ministers and the incredible work that they've done. Every one of those ministers going into the medium-term development plan has submitted very clear and key KPIs and ideas for the medium-term development plan about how we can grow the economy and create jobs in each of their portfolios. We want to be good stewards of the trust placed in us by the people of South Africa, and we want to be good stewards in government in the interests of the people of South Africa. And so when that is not permitted and when it's not allowed, there's no point in us being in government. Have we reached that point yet? No, not yet. I don't believe that. I think the coalition is relatively new. But if this current trend continues of simply giving a tin ear to the views, opinions, thoughts, and ideas of DA ministers in government, then there really is no point us being there. We might as well be sitting in opposition in Parliament and in the country. Because if our ideas aren't going to be listened to and taken on board, there really is no point in us being there. So when will we leave? When the Constitution is trashed and our economy is crashed. Anything that does one of those two things is a red line, and we will make it very clear when that time has come. I'm really hoping, as I said on Saturday, that this this particular situation is cause for a reset in the relations within the GNU, and that there will be some consideration now given to the views, thoughts, and opinions of all parties to the GNU. And as I said, we're not the only party that's upset about the way that this has been handled. There are at least 3 other parties, there's 4 of your coalition partners are unhappy about the way they've been treated. One even referring to it as being stabbed in the back. That clearly is a warning light on the dashboard, and if you don't attend to that problem, it's going to cause much bigger problems down the line. Thanks.
John, thank you. I think there's 2 questions. The one about Fikile Mbalula and Article 19, you touched on it. Is there anything else that we need on that?
No, I said it applies to everything.
It applies to everything. Sorry. Okay, thank you very much. With regards to the market fluctuations, it's just very important to show that after the briefing on Saturday, we saw what the effect was on the currency of South Africa. And it's important that the ANC realizes that the stabilization of this GNU is important for macroeconomical aspects of the country. Just to come back to that last question with regards to market fluctuations. Helen, I'm going to hand over to you with regards to the questions that was directed to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mbeje. Your question was, the DA has been in government for some time in Tshwane and in Johannesburg, and we can't place the blame solely on the ANC. Now, you'll recall that in my introduction, I said that it was easier to turn around Cape Town than it's going to be to turn around Tshwane and Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni and Nelson Mandela Bay and eThekwini and all of the others, Mangaung, all of the other metros. Now, the reason is that the ANC hasn't managed to get rid of all the competent managers yet and replace them with their deployed cadres. They haven't yet managed to take away all the tender-rich functions and place them into entities where their people can control what is happening and then ensure the tenders go to cadres, etc. There hasn't yet been a sabotaging of all of the infrastructure so that these services can be contracted out to ANC cadres who run water trucks and who run a range of other services that have to step in when the municipality can't deliver basic services. So when I took over Cape Town, a lot of things were going downhill. The organogram had been totally broken. Random appointments were being made all over the place. There was a lot of corruption in the system. But there were still some very good managers. The organization hadn't been broken up into little units that could be managed outside the line functions that look after due process and stop corruption. And there was still a legacy of functionality in the city. So stuff still worked. There hadn't been 30 years of no maintenance, for example. Once you have 30 years of no maintenance, it is unbelievably difficult to catch up. And I've often thought, whoa, if I was the mayor of Johannesburg, what would I do? Where would I start? Well, we could start because we stopped the whole decimation of middle management that was underway. And I'll tell you a very brief story very quickly because it's relevant. I'm sorry, I'm taking time. Somebody phoned me. I didn't even remember him. And he said, I just want to thank you. I'm going on retirement now. I'm 65. But thank you because when you came mayor of Cape Town, you stopped all of the process of the ANC moving us all out of our positions. This person was a person of colour. And he said, I would have been moved out of my position and I would not have been able to retire at 65 on pension. And the fact that the DA1 meant that we had uninterrupted good management and we could continue to do. So then we could start focusing the budget on maintenance and on development. And we still had good people in the finance department, and we could get and focus on the few corrupt people like Mr. 10% and other people and move them out of the organization. But it was still a going concern. And the backlog and the collapse had not nearly been as profound as I see in Johannesburg every day when I'm walking around. So, when the DA, and I'm not even saying if, when the DA takes over our metros, the first thing you have to do when you're dealing with this complete collapse and deployed cadres everywhere, you saw what the Supreme Court of Appeal has said about the appointment of Floyd Brimke in Johannesburg, for example, and other things. That wasn't the Supreme Court of Appeal, it was the High Court, my apologies. You saw what he said about that. Your first job is to try and stabilize the finances from bankrupt municipalities that have huge debts and borrowings that they can't repay. That's your first job, stabilize the finance. You have to move out corrupt people, which in our labor regulatory environment is very, very difficult unless you have a smoking gun. You have to get the people who can do the job into the right positions. And throughout all of that, you are being fought by the administration. Fought by the administration, who are trying to get you out, who are trying to undermine you. Now you've got a shaky 9-party coalition. And just someone has to be offered an overseas trip or a this or a that to cross the floor and bring down the government. You don't have the stability to do the job that is required. Without stability, you can't stop corruption. Because every time you move in on a corrupt group of people or entity, they go around your back to the other people and say, the DA is a bunch of racists and you must fight them from within the coalition. And that's what happened to Solly Msimanga, for example. And so, without stability, you can achieve nothing. And if you have a coalition of 9 partners, you can't have stability. Now, in Tshwane, we actually were making some progress until the EFF and the ANC walked out of every single council meeting to crash the quorum, to make it impossible for us to pass budgets and to make it impossible for us to do the work of the municipality. They put us under administration because they said we couldn't do that necessary work, but they put us under administration because they deliberately prevented us from doing that work. When they did that, the city had a budget surplus. When we won in court and the court said you may not deliberately crash a quorum in a council to prevent it from doing its work so that the council can be put under administration. When the court said that and we got back, the city was in billions of debt because it had been looted. That's after nearly 2 years of administration by the ANC. So you must understand what you are up against in these Gauteng metros. Voting for the ANC has consequences, and nowhere do you see the consequences as clearly as you're seeing them in Johannesburg. Tragic, it's an absolute tragedy. I was raised here, I was born here and raised here. So, if we don't have a stable, firm base, maybe with 1 or 2 coalition partners who are committed to fixing Joburg as well, it's what the Afrikaners call an onbegonnen taak. You can't do it, right? Now, people may not like the DA particularly. We're not perfect, no political party is. But we're certainly the very, very best there is on offer. And we're the only one, frankly, the only one, that has the skills, the capacity, the history, the experience, and the policies to turn down these metros. But for the first 5 years, we will only be stabilizing the finance, only be stopping corruption, and only getting the right people in the right positions. And when you've done that, then you can have liftoff. In Cape Town, we could show changes almost instantly because the rot was like an apple just on the one side. It wasn't right through the entire fruit. And that's what makes a massive difference. I'm sorry I've taken a bit of time answering that question, but you need to get the critical importance of stopping the rot early, because there is a time when you are beyond the point of no return.
Thank you very much, Helen. Let's take the next round. Can I have hands? I'm taking it from this side. 1, 2, 3. Can we just get the roaming mic? The next questions, I will go to the other side.
Good day, Buleli Treaty Jones from ENCA. Directed to Mr. Steenhuisen. Are you looking at, as the DA, proposing further internal mechanisms to address potential policy conflict or contradictions in the GNU where you don't reach agreement with other parties or mainly with the ANC? That's number one. And of course, to Helen, the ANC and Freedom Front Plus voted to ask the DA from the mayor's office in Swellendam in the Western Cape. We've seen a similar pattern in other municipalities where the Freedom Front has been working with the ANC to ask DA mayors. Are you concerned about this? Will you be speaking to the Freedom Front Plus because you've been having a healthy relationship in many municipalities working together and voting together? Thank you.
Next person.
Pule has sort of asked my questions. My name is Liza Gatando. I'm from Times Live. The only question that is outstanding, just to add on to Pule's question around Swellendam, what is the state of your relationship with the Freedom Front Plus as of today? And John, perhaps can we have a reaction from you on the US president deciding to suspend all foreign development assistance?
Well, thank you very much. My name is Lunga from the Mail and Guardian. I just have a few questions. I mean, Fikile Mbalula did say that the DA was aware that there was these bills as you went into government with the ANC. Does the DA feel trapped that they were put in ministerial positions where they had to implement policies that they would normally be against? I'm talking about the issue of the Bella Act. We see CVW is there, and also now within the issue of this expropriation bill. I'm just trying to, and also, is it not mischievous for the minister to say he won't be implementing policies simply because she is from the DA? I mean, he's a minister of everyone. It's just not a DA minister. And also, with Helen, you just said that they if the more people are in a coalition, the more unstable it becomes. Would you have rather had the ANC and ousted the others in the GNU to totally just have a two-party coalition? And also, maybe lastly, where do you stand with the, I mean, 2 weeks ago you were calling for Nchaveni to step down as the DA with so many other parties. The issue of JP Smith, if you're raising transparency and allowing the law to take its course, would you not rather have the two MECs in Western Cape removed until they clear their names? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lunga. Yeah, that was 4 questions. We've got quite a lot of questions. I'm going to not direct specific questions to anyone. John, I think there's a whole range of issues that you can touch on as well as Helen. I'm going to start with you, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, we will be proposing mechanisms. It's very clear that there does need to be a far more high-level engagement that happens between the leaders of parties more regularly. If one looks at the coalition in Great Britain that existed, they had what was called a quad, where the 2 leaders and 2 others from each of the parties would attend and thrash out issues before they went to cabinet. So I definitely do think there's scope for more engagement between the leaders of the political parties. The clearinghouse mechanism that exists does not have terms of reference. And the clearinghouse mechanism itself cannot be a substitute for the statement of intent. where clause 19.3 is very, very clear that that there has to be sufficient consensus. Sufficient consensus is clearly defined within that statement of intent. And again, this was a document that was signed freely, willingly, and with open eyes by all parties to the Government of National Unity. And it wasn't something that was inserted later. It was there in black and white at the beginning of the process. And the statement of intent is the foundation upon which the GNU is built. And you cannot go back and start reneging on those key commitments that were made in that initial process. Lizeka, our relationship with the Freedom Front is very good. I reached out to Dr. Peter Groenewald yesterday. They are obviously conducting their own internal processes, which I'll leave them to explain or elaborate on. But we remain committed to working with the Freedom Front to provide good, clean, accountable governance wherever we can work together. It's been unfortunate that there seems to have been a localized dynamic in the Western Cape, and I think there are a variety of reasons for that. However, we look forward to finalizing the stabilization pact that we've been pushing backwards and forwards between each other for the last 2 months. We've now got the Western Cape's views and opinions on it, and we'll obviously look to move towards concluding that stabilization pact. In terms of the funding, I'm very concerned about it. I'm very concerned about the signalling and what this may mean for broader agreements like AGOA further down the line, which we know is supposed to be finalized in September of this year. I'm concerned as well because PEPFAR funding and funding from that is a large cornerstone of the funding for our HIV/AIDS response in South Africa, which is another reason why we perhaps should be very cautious about how we proceed with NHI, because there might be a new budget item that we're going to have to provide for, which would be to fill that gap that will be left by PEPFAR and that funding that's been frozen over the time. And I think it's another reason why we should proceed with caution, with just simply trashing the healthcare sector over an ideological desire rather than something that's based on costed, evidence-based decision-making. Lunga, we don't feel trapped. We went into the coalition with our eyes wide open. We knew exactly what the risks were, but equally we knew exactly what the risks were for us not to go into the coalition. And I certainly think that the benefits that we've seen for South Africa, both internationally and at home, have been significant and are certainly moving in the right direction. Of course, in any coalition, no party can get everything that they want. The DA understands that. We've accepted there are going to be areas where we need to compromise, where we need to retrim our sails. That's a natural flow of what happens in coalitions. That's why most parties like to get a majority, because you don't then have to temper what you want to do by the views and opinions of other parties. But the people of South Africa chose not to give any party a majority, and we must work together. And so, yes, we are prepared to compromise, but we will not compromise on matters that trash the Constitution and on matters that will crash the economy. We went into this coalition with our eyes wide open, and it was for that reason that Minister McPherson addressed his letter to the President last year, midway through, I think it was in the opening few months of the coalition, saying to the President, I know this bill is on your desk. However, these are the concerns that I would have to have if I had to implement it. And attached to that was an opinion which the department had received from senior counsel, pointing out the very obvious flaws in the bill, including the constitutionality of the contradictory clauses. Now, ministers, when they're sworn into office, don't swear allegiance to the President. They swear allegiance to the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and swear to uphold the Constitution and all other law of the Republic. Now, when something is patently unconstitutional and when something is patently incorrect, and the minister who'd be responsible for implementing that points this out and just simply gets a no, with no guidance or explanation as to what the correct way to proceed would be, and that the leaders of the parties then, without any consultation, find out about this on social media. That's not how coalitions work. And I think it's been badly handled. And I think that that's why there needs to be a meeting with the senior leaders of the coalition, and why I've sought a meeting with Mr. Ramaphosa directly so that I could share these views with him to his face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Helen, would you take the two questions about the coalition size as well as the JP Smith matter, please?
Yes. Right. As you all know, the GNU is a coalition, is a form of coalition. Now, in a normal coalition, you have a situation, a starting situation, where no party got 50% plus one of the vote, and they would like to get above 50%, so they look for coalition partners to bring them above 50%. And once they've got above 50%, they want to have the stability. They don't want to have too many partner parties, but it's often very useful to have a reserve outside, that if your partner party gives you a lot of trouble inside the coalition, you can have plan B. That's what I learned very much during the coalitions that I managed. However, when we signed the statement of intent, which was in itself a huge education for me, clause 24 said that the original signatories to the statement of intent would have to be agreed amongst themselves before new people could join this government of national unity. And that was in clause 24. If you read it, I haven't got the word for word in my head, but it basically says, for the people who agree to come into this, and that's when we signed it, if any people are added, or if any parties are added, it'll have to be in consultation with each other. And at that time, and at the time that we elected President Ramaphosa as president of the country, because that was when the statement of intent became operable, there were three founding parties. There was the DA, there was the ANC, and there was the Inkatha Freedom Party. Within 4 or 5 days, the president was announcing all sorts of other people who joined, without any respect for clause 24, as if it didn't exist. And I could only conclude to myself, either they couldn't care that it exists, or they don't know that it exists, or they're doing whatever they want anyway. And that was our first huge red light, that the ANC wasn't taking this seriously and was just continuing as if they could call the shots entirely. And you may remember that I was on television with Fikile Mbalula, and I pointed this out to him, and a lot of people didn't like that I did point it out to him, of course. So, the only parties that can actually bring down the government are the DA and the ANC. Every other party in the government is there by grace and favour of President Ramaphosa. And if you are a minister or a deputy minister or a chair of a committee or whatever it is you are, you have to please President Ramaphosa, because he is the person who holds your fate in his hands. And of course, that's why the ANC wants a whole lot of smaller parties, because then they have a little hallelujah chorus that supports them on everything that they do. And it's very convenient with the ANC not always to have to fight with us. They get their proxies to fight with us. And then it looks different. But their proxies, of course, are going to side with the ANC, no matter what they said in the election, because Ramaphosa can relieve them from their positions. Now, we are not there by grace and favour of the president. We are there by grace and favour of the voters. The voters gave us the balance of power. And so we go there to represent the 3.5 million people who voted for us. And we have to say to those people, we can't get everything we want. Because if we wanted everything we wanted, we had to get 50% plus one of the vote. But we're in a coalition to share power. And so don't get upset with us when we have to compromise now and again, because we didn't get enough votes. If you don't want us to compromise, give us more votes. But the ANC has to say that too. And the existence of what I call the Hallelujah Chorus does not mean to say that they have any muscle in government, but it's very useful for the ANC, as we saw in the clearinghouse. I won't go into that, but in the clearinghouse. And in fact, there are two parties that can bring down the government, and so two major coalition partners in the GNU are the DA and the ANC. The JP Smith thing. Okay, JP Smith, right. The suspension of people who have been raided by the police. Now, Jordan Hill-Lewis is the mayor of Cape Town. And he has had to determine whether to suspend, I think so far, it is 4 councillors who have been accused of infringements that might warrant suspension. And on each occasion, he has looked at the prima facie evidence against that person. Now, I'll take the example of the most common issue that's been raised, and that is the example of Malusi Boy, who was arrested and now charged on several quite serious counts of corruption involving housing projects. After Malusi's office was searched, the police had a discussion with Jordan, and Jordan said, as a courtesy, could I know what the prima facie evidence is, untested evidence is, that you have against him, so that I can see whether this is a political hit squad or whether there is some real substantive stuff to which he has to answer. The police weren't obliged to do that, but they said, yes, there's a lot of substantive stuff. And untested evidence, but prima facie evidence, convinced the mayor that there was a serious case that Malusi had to answer, and he therefore suspended him. In another case where there was an allegation that an electricity meter had been bypassed of a house belonging to one of his mayoral executive committee members, he went into it. It was a fact that it had been bypassed. He suspended him, but then the member could prove that other people lived there and that they had done that even though the house was in his name. So then he was reinstated, obviously. But there was a prima facie case against him because in a house owned by him, the electricity meter had been bypassed. In another case, somebody was accused of rape, and Jordan was convinced that there was no prima facie evidence, and there was a very convincing argument that it might have been a revenge motive. And so he said, we'll wait for the court case to run its course. We won't be the jury and judge. It's a criminal trial, and the person was acquitted. So Jordan made the right decision. And in another case that I'm not so familiar with the details of. So all I know is that Jordan looks at what evidence there is, and he's doing exactly the same with the JP Smith case. In the JP Smith case, he's asked the police to extend to him the same courtesy as they extended to him with Malusi Boy. And he says before he takes a decision to suspend, he's got to check whether this is a political hit squad or whether there's something genuine. And he then says, give me a briefing on the prima facie evidence that still has to be tested in court, that is untested now, but I, as the responsible mayor, have to see if he's got a genuine case to answer. And that briefing, I understand, should be happening about today, and Jordan will make that decision on the basis of what he sees before him. Now, if you compare every other case that has been raised around issues, we demand that people be suspended when we believe there's prima facie evidence of wrongdoing, either in a past job or whatever there is, as for example with Minister Nchaveni, and we are very wary of being mindful that political hit squads in politics are not unusual. When I was the mayor of Cape Town, they accused me, now listen to this, it still boggles my mind to this day, of using council funds to spy on our coalition partners and members of my own party. Something more far-fetched you couldn't find, but that was a political hit squad. And because they knew they could never ever charge me in court, they set up the Erasmus Commission to discredit me. That was a political hit squad. So I'm telling you, you've got to be careful in politics. And Jordan is going about it in exactly the right way, saying, I want to see the prima facie evidence, untested. It's a courtesy, the police don't have to show him, but he's got to make a solid judgment.
Thank you very much, Helen. Colleagues, we are running out of time. I'm going to allow 2 more questions that we had on this side. There will be an opportunity afterwards for questions as well. Gert? Okay. John says his voice might not make it, but we will assist with that. Let's go to Gert van der Westhuizen in front here.
Hello, Mr. Steenhuisen. I would like to know, over the weekend it became clear that there are huge ideological differences between the ANC and the DA. Will you ever be able to work properly together in a GNU because of that? Will a proper consensus ever be possible? And Fikile Mbalula also said over the weekend there was no agreement beforehand to put a moratorium on legislation that was passed in the previous administration. What would be your comment on that, please?
Thank you very much. Can we have the last one here right behind? Thank you.
Good day, John. My name is Amanda Khoza. I'm from News 24. The Cabinet Lekgotla is taking place tomorrow. When exactly are you meeting the President?
That was so short, I'm going to allow a last one there at the back, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ferial Hafaji from the Daily Maverick. May I please check with you, Mr. Steenhuisen, given the rising tensions, do you think the GNU will last the year? And secondly, under what conditions will you withhold support for passing the budget come February? Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, we've got the 4 questions, but you can, if you are fine with it with your voice. Sure, thanks.
Thank you very much, Gert, for that. Yes, there are ideological differences between the DA and the ANC. In fact, there are broad ideological differences between the 10 parties to the GNU. But so too are there broad ideological differences in coalitions around the world. Broad ideological differences between the SPD and the FDP in Germany. Broad ideological differences between the Lib Dems in Britain and the Conservative Party. All over the world. There's a whole view about coalitions and made up of different parties, and they are different parties because different parties have different ideas and they attract different types of voters. But ideological differences shouldn't be a gulf when you're coming together around a common set of objectives. And so yes, the ANC have their views, we have ours, but surely we can agree that economic growth and jobs are the primary focus of this country. Because without economic growth and jobs, we're not going to be able to lift people out of poverty. We're not going to end hunger. We're not going to create better opportunities for more people. We're not going to have a government that's able to spend more on social infrastructure. Because without that economic growth, we're going to continue the way we've been for the last 20 years, where our country just slides further and further into debt and closer to a fiscal cliff. So in a country where it is in a deep crisis like South Africa, we can agree on the big things that need to be done to get the economy moving. And that's why I've said, we entered the government to grow the economy and to create jobs. And everything that we do as a government should surely be looked at through the lens of creating jobs, growing the economy and ending poverty. And we should discard everything that does not speak to those key priorities. And that when issues that threaten the economic stability of the country, like an entirely uncosted, untested, untried NHI, it poses a significant risk to the balance sheet of South Africa, poses a significant risk to the social stability of the country, and it poses a huge risk to the sustainability of healthcare in the country. But we all agree that we need universal access to basic healthcare for all South Africans, regardless of their income or geography. And surely we can work together to fixing that. So let's start by fixing the public healthcare system. Let's focus on public-private partnerships like we've done with Operation Vulindlela. Let's rather start with the suggestions made by the private hospital groups, by the practitioners, all of whom have signed a big red warning line. There's a problem here. How does it make economic sense to proceed with something when there's such vehement opposition from the very people who you're going to expect to implement it? How do you proceed with something, honestly, in a budget where it's completely uncosted and where even the most conservative estimates place it way beyond the reach of what we're able to afford in the current fiscal envelope? But that doesn't mean we can't start doing what we've already done in the Western Cape. Let's focus on improving treatment of people at hospitals, public healthcare facilities. Focus on improving the experience of people with the interface with the public healthcare system. Employing more nurses and doctors. Making sure we improve standards there. Those are the things that we can all agree in the medium-term development plan need to be done. And I don't think that anyone could disagree with that. So in a coalition where there are ideological differences, you focus on the things that you can get right. And let me be very clear. We're not here to implement the national democratic revolution. That's the ANC's ideology. It's not the ideology of the Government of National Unity. There are 9 other parties in that GNU, and they all have their own views and opinions. And we're not there to implement the NDR. We're there to promote growth and jobs. And that's our focus there. Amanda, the meeting is taking place later this evening. Obviously waiting finalisation from the President's office. It's scheduled to take place then at least. Burial's question? Sorry.
Will the GNU last?
Yeah, I think the GNU will last if there's a genuine commitment by the parties to be proper stewards and good coalition partners. So I said very clearly, we are committed to the GNU. We regard it as South Africa's most precious asset at the moment, given what we are seeing, the effect of it on economic growth and jobs already. And it's not something we've entered lightly, and it's certainly not something we'll exit lightly. But the moment we're unable to promote jobs and economic growth, and that we are treated as bystanders in a government which we bring a large share of the votes to, it will obviously have to reconsider. So I believe it can last. I believe it must last. I think the alternatives are too ghastly to contemplate. But it requires then a maturity. Sorry. It requires a level of maturity and partnership that to date has not been displayed. And I think if we're going to make this thing last in the interests of South Africa, which I think it behoves us to do, then I think we need to move into a new reset era where there is greater consensus on decision making. And it applies on everything. South Africa's international relations stance. This is not an ANC government anymore. There are other parties with different views and opinions, and we must have those discussions. How do we get the economy growing? Yes, you've got different views and opinions, but how do we focus on the levers of growth and job creation? And let's focus like a laser beam on those things. There are so many challenges facing our country after 20 years of absolute flat economic growth and our country heading in the wrong direction. There's lots to overcome. And we're not going to be able to do everything in the first 5 years. We must accept that. But surely we can focus on growth and jobs and start to turn the needle so that by the time 2029 rolls around, we'll have something concrete to show South Africans. An economy that's more inclusive and growing, more people in work, more children with greater opportunities when they leave school, better public service that processes and treats people like customers, making sure that we've got access to cheap internet so that more entrepreneurs can start up, making sure our basic education system is working, making sure that there's justice for small fisher folk in small towns around South Africa, making sure we build the rural economy, making sure we're able to move people out of subsistence farming into family farming and commercial farming. We can show South Africans those things by 2029. I think we'd be able to look back with pride at this time and see these difficulties that we had, but know in the end it was worth it. But that can only come if there's a reset in the relations in the GNU and that we're treated as partners, not as bystanders. Thank you very much. The budget. Well, if you include NHI and you abolish medical aids and have it transferred into a fund, there's no ways we'd be able to support a budget like that because it's not a real budget. The billions of rand that NHI is expected to cost you will blow out the budget massively. So in the medium-term development plan, I think what the focus should be on is how we focus on fixing primary healthcare and public healthcare facilities. And we pour money and effort and resources into that. Once we've done that, we can come back and have a debate around medical aids and medical tax credits at a later stage. But my worry is that you're going to crash the entire system and it will be a catastrophic economic blow for South Africa as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John. Colleagues, sorry. Colleagues, thank you very much for being here. It is extremely clear that the Democratic Alliance wants to make South Africa work and that we want to do it via this GNU and that we will do a lot of things to protect this GNU. It is, however, high time now that the ANC does the same. I want to remind everybody that the Democratic Alliance's candidate selection process will open on the 1st of February, and we invite every person out there that thinks that he or she can make a contribution towards the Democratic Alliance as well as this country to please come and join us. John, thank you very much for holding out with your voice. That's clearly, John was yesterday already, he started to battle, and this morning I said, are you fine? He said, let's push through. So John, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, the Gauteng virus. Dr. Ivan Meyer, thank you very much for you as well for being here and for steering us on the federal side, and Ellen, for you as well. We really appreciate it. Colleagues, this is the end of the press conference. There will be an opportunity for questions afterwards, which I and some of the other panel members will be able to assist you with. Thank you very much.